This is a video on auxiliary verbs of English. So what are they? They're basically words that express time and the characteristics of verbs, and verbs are basically energy transmissions, either in time, place, or they might be in the mind. So verbs, once again, are energy transmissions, energy. So if we take the solar system as an example of our environment and a place in which energy transmissions happen, we can analyze auxiliary verbs using the Earth as a subject. The verb could be orbit and the object could be the sun. Just if we want a basic sentence, we can use these components and we can add some auxiliary verbs to the verb orbit in many ways. So let's have a look at some examples. So on this table, we've got a bunch of examples, and when you look at the verbs, those are the blue parts. The verb is orbit, and it's the same verb over and over, just to make it easier to understand. And the yellow part represents time. So we're looking at all kinds of time frames, and we're adding time information to the blue part, which is the verb, in all kinds of ways, just to exemplify or to show you how to use auxiliary verbs and how they're conjugated. Later on in the video, we'll actually look at the grammar of how to combine them together. So let's look at the top example. We're basically expressing future, a time period, and something that's incomplete. And the function of that sentence is basically to quantify or to count exactly how long something happens. So the Earth will, that's future, have been, that's a long time, or a period if you prefer, and been orbiting means not finished. So we'll have been orbiting the sun for 365 days. By the end of the time period is December 31st, because that's how we measure time. When the Earth goes around the sun one time, that's a year. So the end of that time period is December 31st. Okay, so this sentence again, the Earth will have been orbiting the sun for 365 days by December 31st. And the focus of the sentence is the total amount of time. So for 365 days is the emphasis of the sentence. So the function is to quantify how long something happens over a period of time into the future. Okay. The next example is a little bit more simplistic. It's just the future over a time period. The Earth, future will, have orbited the sun by December 31st. So what is the function here? The function of this particular sentence is to express that the process will be complete at a specific time in the future, and that specific time is December 31st. The end of the time period is by December 31st. Once again, the Earth will have orbited the sun by December 31st. The next example, we're going to use future and incomplete. So the Earth, future will be orbiting is the incomplete part, and the sun until it dies. So the Earth will be orbiting the sun until it dies. And the function of this particular sentence is to determine when the Earth will stop orbiting the sun, and basically the idea is that it's not going to stop until it's worn out, or in other words, it's past its expiration date, when the solar system has run its course or finished working because it can't go on anymore because it's dead. Okay, the next one, the time period that's incomplete. The Earth has, that's a long time, has been, that's a time period. Been orbiting means not finished, so that's a time period that's incomplete. So the Earth has been orbiting the sun for 4.5 billion years, and the function of this sentence is to quantify the amount of times. This is countable. How many times has the Earth been orbiting the sun? So I want the total amount of times. It's a quantity, and the focus is 4.5 billion years. The next example is a simple time period. The Earth has orbited, that's a period, a simple time period. The Earth has orbited the sun about 4.5 billion times, and this particular time period is relevant today. It's present perfect, if you like, because this period of time is not finished and it's relevant right now. So the function of this particular sentence is to quantify how many times. So the Earth has orbited the Sun how many times? About 4.5 billion times. And the last example of an auxiliary conjugate is with incomplete transmissions or incomplete energy. The Earth is orbiting the Sun at the moment. So the function here is to determine what the Earth is doing in this moment. And it's not finished. Once again, just remember the only verbs you can use with that particular be and ing structure are temporal verbs, verbs that happen in situations, in time and place. You can't use them with, or this conjugation, you can't use it with mental verbs. For example, understand, or know, or emotional verbs like love, hate, etc. There are many of those. And the last example is just to exemplify the present simple, in that we don't add auxiliaries to the present simple because the present simple expresses frequency or things that happen outside time and space. So once again, auxiliaries express time and place, time and space. So situations, if you like, and present simple expresses things that are outside of situations. Okay. Here are some questions just to check your knowledge of the concepts. How long will the Earth have been orbiting the Sun by December 31st? That's a future time period that's not finished. And the function of the sentence and the question is to determine the total amount of time. So we're going to quantify, if you like, quantify the total amount of time into the future, and we're focusing on the end of the time period, which is December 31st. For 365 days is the total amount of days, or the total quantity of time. Okay, when will the Earth have orbited the Sun? That's future time period. So I want to just basically know the specific day in the future when it's finished by December 31st. So we use the preposition by often to express the future at the end of a time period. And how long will the Earth be orbiting the Sun? I want to know the total amount of time it will orbit the Sun until it finishes. And the answer, until it dies. It's not going to stop itself. It's not sentient or conscious. It's just going to go until it can't go anymore. How many times has the Earth orbited the Sun? I just want the total amount of times from the beginning it started orbiting the Sun until today. So the time period from the beginning until today. And the answer, about 4.5 billion times. And how many times per year does the Earth orbit the Sun? In this example, we're using do or does to express frequency, something that happens outside one situation, outside time space. We're expressing more of a concept, something that happens with frequency, if you like. Once is the answer. Okay. Let's look at the auxiliary verb table so we can understand auxiliaries a little bit more and analyze the grammar so we understand how to apply auxiliary verbs in our sentences and in our questions. So this is the basic system. We've got the first three auxiliaries used for, once again, time and place. So we need to use these little words, these auxiliary verbs, and attach them to verbs if we are talking situationally, if we're expressing actions that occur inside situations in time and place. So it's situational language. The first one we call modal. There are 9 modals in total, and the ones in the blue we call them V1 or present modals, and the green ones are the V2 ones. So they can express concepts like basic future, your level of confidence about an action in the future, and sometimes in the past, For example, my confidence about something happening in the future could be high, so I might use will or can. Whereas if my confidence is lower, I might use would or could. So that's less confident, I'm not sure. Or might, for example. That's like 50-50. You could express obligation as well with must, and you could make a suggestion with shall and should. Shall meaning me and you together make a decision often, and should could be you, second person or second person plural, whatever. The conjugation is the base form, so you can only use the basic form of a verb after a modal, and we'll look at some examples in a minute. The second auxiliary is used for time periods, that's have and has. This auxiliary expresses actions that happen over a period of time, so a duration, if you like, it's another word you could use, durations. And the conjugation is always the third verb form, or the past participle. So we say V3 where I work, PP, whatever you want to say. It's the same thing. So the third auxiliary is used for two things. You can express that something is not finished. That's a temporal action, a situational action that is not finished. So we would use is, are, was, were with the ing conjugation. And you could also express received action with the is, are, was, were, and the V3 form or the PP form, otherwise known as the passive voice, for various reasons. Like if you want to focus on the subject, you need to put it after the verb. For example, Honda makes cars, cars are made by Honda. So I'm changing the direction of the transmission from left to right, going right to left. So basically Honda receives that transmission, or it's the product of that transmission. And then the last one, simple verbs. Simple present and simple past. Do, does expresses things that happen outside time and space, more with frequency, speaking generally. And then the did auxiliary expresses an action that happens at a specific time in the past. So we use did for questions and for negative past simple. Let's look at what V1, V2, V3 and the base really means, just to make it clear. Here is an example of V1 or verb 1 or present simple. The earth orbits. So the S on the verb expresses that it's happening with frequency. The S can also express that a person is not joining you in the conversation, they are not here, so a third person, for example. But basically when you use V1, you're not talking situationally, you're talking outside of a situation, and you're talking about how often something happens. Verb 2 is the past simple, so there's no auxiliary here, it's just the past simple, so a common suffix is ed. Verb 3 is the PP or past participle form, and it's conjugated with the have or has auxiliary to express a time period, and then the base form is used with the modal verbs and do. So as you can see, orbit has no suffix, it's just the basic form of the verb, or the original form. Alright, let's look at some examples. So we're going to make a few sentences and I'll give you some scenarios, and then we can consider the time in which the actions happen, and we can apply auxiliary verbs to the sentences to see what happens. Okay, here are the Nortons. It's this family in this airport walking past, the Nortons, and they are going to Auckland from Los Angeles, and they're flying, obviously. The departure is 6 a.m. The flight is 12 hours, and at the moment we could say it's 12 p.m, so it's lunchtime. They leave at 6 a.m, the flight's 12 hours, therefore the touchdown is 6 p.m, so that's a 12-hour flight. So 6 p.m. is in the future. Therefore, we're going to need to use auxiliary 1 because the touchdown is in the future. When they arrive, that's the future. The end of the flight, if you prefer, is in the future. So we're going to use a modal. We're also going to use the second auxiliary have, because 12 hours is a long time, that's a time period. And the third one also, we're going to use BING because I want to quantify the total amount of time. If you want to count how long an action happens into the future, we need to use BING. So we're going to use modal, have, be with ing. So let's try and make a sentence. Okay, so by the end of the time period, which is 12 p.m. into the future, the Nortons, and then I need to use some auxiliaries to express future, long time, and not finished, and the total quantity of time is the focus of this sentence. So remember, we need 1, 2, and 3, plus the conjugate formula at the end, which will be on the principal verb fly, and then we'll have a complete sentence. Let's have a look. Okay, so by 12 p.m. the Nortons will have been flying for 12 hours. So that's future perfect continuous, if you like. Will for the future, that's a general future situation. Have for the time period, and be with ing, meaning I want to quantify the total amount of time at the end, which is 12 p.m. Okay, let's look at another one. A new sentence, a new scenario. Okay, this can be you. Let's talk about you and the idea of learning. So you're on your computer learning, and we want to talk about not just the verb learn and you. We want to express what kind of time frame we're talking about. We want to talk about learn, which is a mental energy, and we also want to talk about the time in which you learn. So it happens over a time period. We don't just learn something in a moment. We learn something over a time period. Watching this video, for example, might be 20 minutes or so. So that's a time period. We're going to talk about the end of the time period as well, when you shut down your computer, or when you log out, or when you close the program or YouTube or whatever you're watching. So we're going to talk about learning over a time period, and we want to talk about the end, which is obviously the future because we're not finished yet. So it sounds like future time period. Okay, so yeah, we're going to need number 1 because we're not finished. That's the future. We're going to talk about the end of the lesson, which is the future because we're not finished. We're going to talk about a time period because learning happens over a time period. So we're going to use a modal and have. Okay, by the end of class, or by the end of this video, and then we need to talk about future because the end of the class is the future, and a time period. So it's going to be future time period. Let's have a look. By the end of class, we will have learned all about verb tenses. So we need will for the future, we need have for the time period, and the conjugation is V3. Okay, let's try another one. Just one more, I think. Okay, this is Fred. And he started work at 7 a.m. So he's obviously got a long day. He starts work at 7 a.m. and it looks like he's going from the morning into the night. Okay, he's still working at 8 p.m. So it's a really long day. And at the moment, let's just say, for example, it's 8 p.m. So we're looking from 8 p.m. back to the beginning of his day. So let's imagine that now it's 8 p.m. and we're talking about Fred starting work at 7 p.m. So that's a long time and he's not finished work because it says he's still working. So we're not going to need number 1 because we're not talking about the future. We're just talking about from now backwards. We're going to need number 2 because that's a really long day from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. It's a really long day. So it's like a massive day at work. We're going to use the third auxiliary, so it'll be like BING, because he's not finished. So long time not finished, if you like. Let's have a look. He, and then we want to express long time and not finished. So it should be 2 and 3 and a conjugation. And then we can use the preposition since, which means the beginning of a time period. If you want to talk about the total time period, you use for. Okay, let's have a look. He has been working since 7 a.m. So we're going to use has because it's a long time, and been with ing because he's not finished, since 7 a.m. is the beginning of the time period. Okay, I think that's enough for now. And that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching.